So first, we're going to talk about what we call a class effect strategy. So there are numerous ways to address a pay disparity. We're going to be taking you through three strategies. And the first one is the class effect strategy. So under this approach, all members of an impacted class are eligible for a uniform pay adjustment to address the class effect revealed by the pay equity analysis. So as an example, if the pay equity analysis reveals that Black women are paid 4% less than white men, then all Black women, regardless of their actual pay level, would receive a 4% pay increase. So essentially, if we find that there's a class effect of 4% for a particular demographic class, everyone in that demographic class would receive a 4% pay increase, regardless of their pay situation. And a primary advantage of this strategy is it's pretty straightforward to implement because everyone in the same demographic class is receiving the same percentage increase. And also under this strategy, pay adjustments tend to be smaller, but they're spread across a larger number of people because everybody who's a part of a demographic class that has where we find some sort of disparity, so they're an impacted class, everybody who's part of an impacted class would be receiving an adjustment, but the adjustments tend to be relatively small. And kind of in our experience, the primary objection to this strategy is that people who are part of an impacted class, some of those individuals are going to be in a situation where their actual pay exceeds their predicted pay. But under this class effect strategy, those individuals, even if their actual pay exceeds their predicted pay, would still be eligible for an adjustment. So under this approach, you may be giving an adjustment to someone who is already highly paid. So I think we can move on to the next slide. So the next slide, here we're talking about what we call the class plus individual broad strategy. So unlike the class effect strategy, where we gave the same adjustment to everybody in an impacted class in terms of percentage terms, under this approach, we're taking a different tactic. So under this approach, in a pay analysis group with a class disparity, every employee whose actual pay is less than predicted is eligible for a pay adjustment, regardless of their demographic class. So we're specifically referring to this class plus individual strategy as a broad strategy. And that is because if a pay analysis group has a disparity, we're going to be giving adjustments to everybody, regardless of their demographic characteristics, as long as their actual pay is less than predicted. So anyone whose actual pay is less than predicted would be eligible for an adjustment. And the size of the adjustment, unlike the class effect strategy, where everybody in a particular demographic class would be getting the same adjustment size, here the adjustment size depends on how far someone's actual pay is from their predicted pay. So larger adjustments would be going to those further away from their prediction. And the primary advantage of this type of approach is that it's a fair process because all employees paid less than prediction, regardless of their demographics, are eligible for an adjustment. But there are some notable drawbacks associated with this particular strategy. So one, not surprisingly, it's less effective at addressing the class-based disparity that you're trying to fix, right? Because you're giving adjustments to some people who are not part of an impacted class. So you're giving adjustments to people based on whether or not their actual pay falls below prediction, but that would then include some individuals who are not part of an impacted class. And so you're kind of fighting against yourself a little bit in terms of trying to actually address the pay disparity. And then two, on top of that, there are some people who are part of an impacted class who will not receive an adjustment. So specifically, those individuals who are part of an impacted class, so they are part of a class that has a pay disparity, but they happen to be paid more than their prediction. So their actual pay exceeds their predicted pay. They will not receive an adjustment. And also, this strategy is pretty costly to implement because you're not only giving adjustments to people who are, to members of an impacted class who are paid less than prediction, you're also giving adjustments to members of non-impacted classes who are paid less than prediction. So it tends to be a pretty costly approach to take. So our third strategy is what we call the class plus individual focused strategy. So the last one was a broad strategy. This one is a more focused version of that broad strategy. So essentially, it's the same as the class plus individual effect broad strategy, with the exception that only members of impacted classes are eligible for that pay adjustment, right? So specifically, only members of impacted classes who are paid less than their prediction are eligible. So here we're not, unlike the broad strategy, where anybody in that pay analysis group who's paid less than prediction would receive an adjustment. Here we're saying no, only members of an impacted class who are paid less than their prediction are eligible for an adjustment. And the primary kind of advantage of this approach is that it's more efficient than the broad approach, since it limits eligibility to pay adjustments to those who are part of an impacted class. So you're only giving adjustments to people who are part of an impacted class. Also, you tend to have fewer pay adjustments as compared to a class effect strategy. So remember, with the class effect strategy, we're giving the same size adjustment to everybody who's part of an impacted class, regardless of their actual pay. Where here, we're only giving adjustments to people who are paid less than their prediction. So you end up with fewer adjustments compared to that class effect strategy. But the primary drawback of this strategy is that pay adjustments tend to be larger, which may result in higher remediation costs. And the reason for that is because under a class effect strategy, we're just addressing the class effect. So if there's a 2% pay disparity or 3% pay disparity, then everybody in that demographic class will receive a 2 or 3% pay disparity. Whereas if we're looking at a class plus individual focus strategy, we're giving people adjustments based on how far they are from their predicted pay. So some people might be very far from their predicted pay. So you might actually have some pretty large adjustments to make if you decide to bring everybody up to their predicted pay. So what we typically see is that this approach is a bit more expensive. Even though you're giving adjustments to fewer people, you're giving much larger adjustments to those individuals.